Burma, or Myanmar, has been a closed country for most of anyone's recent memory. I was blessed being able to move here for work in 2007, and I stayed on after my job finished to explore the Dhamma deeper to my heart's content. As I did so, I found the lived reality on the ground didn't quite match up with how it was being depicted by practitioners and teachers describing it in the West. This isn't so surprising, perhaps. Unlike Thailand, where Western monks and teachers have spent formative years and even several decades studying and practicing, that was never possible to do here. For many years, it was hard enough to get a visa for 7 days. In any case, part of our motivation in this podcast is to provide a more authentic, on-the-ground view of what the Dhamma life really feels like in the Golden Land. We do this by checking in with dozens of voices whose lives have been shaped by the Burma Dhamma and are willing to take just a moment to share their own personal transformation. So sit back and enjoy what follows, and I hope you learn something valuable as well along the way. Of all places, the Baskin-Robbins ice cream parlor off of Soi Ari in downtown Bangkok is the site of a very vivid memory attached for me. On a visa trip to Thailand with my wife several years ago, we emerged from a soak at the Unimori Japanese onsen and decided to grab one of those sweet treats not yet available in the Golden Land. While she was paying, I was browsing my Facebook feed and happened upon an unusual post in a Yangon group. In perfectly written English, a young Burmese man was discussing a monastic school in a rural area near his home in Upper Burma outside of Monywa and inviting backpackers and expats to visit and, if possible, volunteer. With Myanmar opening up after so many years of being a closed country, things like internet access, English fluency, and cross-cultural project building were all in the early stages. I'd never seen a post remotely like this before. I immediately got in touch with the author of the post, Zaw Win Htet. We corresponded a bit by email, and later, I sent him dozens of draft pages of the Meditator's Guide to Myanmar that our team had been working on, asking if he wouldn't mind assisting us. This text included the full Monywa area chapters, with extensive sections on Lady Sayadaw's life and teachings. Zaw agreed, and he immediately impressed upon us his diligence and attention to detail. He pored over one Burmese history book after another, dug into the Dhamma teachings of local Sayadas, carefully marking up our pages and undertaking his own translations. And as if this were not enough, he traveled in person to many sites to conduct his own interviews and send us his notes and photos. Any foreign meditator who has benefited from spiritual travel to the Monywa region from our book or social media posts has Zaw to thank for it. After several years, we finally got the opportunity to meet in person. I was leading a pilgrimage that landed in Monywa, and he met us there. We spent a day in his hometown of Chaung Oo, arriving just as his family made a large offering to a number of nuns at their home, and we joined in the good wishes and happily dug into the delicious food. He then drove us around, giving us an enthralling tour of Little Bagan, or the Amyet region near his home. After years of corresponding electronically, his joyful presence only increased my esteem for him, and I was happy that his small Chaung Oo community had such a brilliant star in its midst. After that, occasionally on Facebook I would see a photo Zaw had taken at Shredigon Pagoda or some other Yangon landmark, and I would gently chide him via email for taking yet another trip to the big city without looking us up. I eventually exacted a promise that on his next such visit, he would come to our home for sure. Fortunately for all you podcast listeners, that was after our recording studio was set up. True to his humble nature, Zaw offered over a dozen reasons why others would be a more worthwhile guest than himself. But he finally acquiesced when he was convinced that his involvement could increase the faith of even one foreign practitioner in the truth of the Buddha's teachings. For someone whose life is a true testament of service towards others, it's not surprising this is the hook that brought him in. Zaw Win Htet is curious about the world and does not just accept what he is told or sees at face value, traits that are unfortunately not that common in a country whose education system has traditionally been neglected, and at times even actively suppressed. He actively seeks out learned people and listens carefully to what they have to say, and he reads voraciously. Add to this a special ability, and frankly one which I'm envious of, to synthesize, retain, and communicate what he learns in an extremely coherent way. A little prompt here or a small nudge there is all Zaw needed to be off and running, and what he has to share about his country is well worth hearing. There are some pretty incredible stories in what follows. Some inspiring, some dramatic, some legendary, and some, well, almost unbelievable. I'm so glad that we were able to record his voice and that it's now available for you all to benefit from. But don't take my word for it. Listen up and decide for yourselves. So welcome for the first time in our place. I've been trying to get you here for years. I always see that I see on your Facebook that you're just leaving Yangon or just in Yangon a short time. I'm always saying, oh, why didn't you tell me we want to have you over? And finally, this time you said that you were coming for some event in Yangon and you had a day to spend with us. And I was so excited, and the studio was set up and I can pull you in here. We just met once before this in person when I came to Monywa and then to Chaung Oo. We've been in touch for years over the internet, and it was such a delight to meet a couple years ago in person and spend that time together. And then it was great to continue corresponding, and I'm really glad that you were able to come this time and that we could hang out outside the studio, and then we can also get a chance to check in with you here, because I think the story that you're going to tell and some of the background that you have to share is just really great to be able to have people out there be able to listen in.
It is my pleasure to come here, and thank you for your invitation as well.
Yeah, and we should also say that our relationship and involvement began with you really helping us out in the Meditator's Guidebook. As I mentioned, you are from Monywa, which is famous for the Lady Sayadaw region. Also, some of his disciples, such as Monyen Sayadaw, were in that area. Bodhi Tatang Sayadaw.
Yes.
Bodhi Tatang Sayadaw is there.
Sayadaw,
right,
yes.
He's also there. And you're from Chaung Oo. And in the Meditator's Guidebook, you were absolutely of great help in being able to provide us a lot of very exact information about some of the history and the culture and the monasteries and the practices in that region that made those chapters much better. So that was the beginning of our relationship. And then since then, we've seen the work you're doing at your monastic school in your region. And maybe let's just start hearing a little about the history of your village, Chaung Oo. Where is it and why is it important?
As you can see, Chaung Oo is a small town, but in history is a huge history. It has a huge history since the era of Bagan. So it was studied. But in the writings, it became famous after the poem composed by Sayaji the King Kyasawa, who is the national leader and the teachers of General Aung San, and also the King and the other the King Biba. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, since we were young, we heard a lot of stories about the history of our town, Chaung Oo. You can hear Chaung Oo. Chaung means the stream. Oo means take fast, like that. So, in our oral histories, my grandma always said every night about our history. Ginjan said, maybe you have heard about it. Ginjan ran away from Bagan Kingdom because he made his king Norata angry, and then he ran away from the capital, and then he was hiding from the bullets of the King Norata. At that time, he came to Chaung Oo areas, and then he left many places behind his running away. So in Chaung Oo area, he competed with the stream, Jambi by the Jambi and Jambi, But at the time, the water in the stream goes past before him. So when he became the king, he named this village Chaung Oo, because the stream beats him. Stream beats him.
Right. And for someone who doesn't know a lot about Myanmar geography, how could you describe where Chaung Oo is located?
Everybody knows Mandalay, right? So
Upper Myanmar.
Upper Myanmar. Yeah. Mandalay was the capital city, so everybody may know. But in the west of Mandalay, and it is 2.5 hour drive from Mandalay to the west and to the northwest region. It is in the lower part of Zagan region.
Okay, so it's about 2.5 hour by car northwest of Mandalay, which is in Upper Myanmar.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And you would reference that the origins of Chaung Oo come from a subject of King Kyasawa from Bagan, who was running away from the king to escape his life. What years are we talking about?
Around 880.
Around 800 AD. So,
yes.
So you trace your village's formation to around 800 AD.
800 AD, yes.
Right. Okay. And can you clarify again that Chaung Oo means a quickly moving stream? Is that correct?
Yeah, it goes fast.
A stream that goes fast.
Yeah, goes fast before King Kyasawa.
So the king that was escaping King Kyasawa, that he named it the stream that runs fast because
King Kyasawa ran away from King Kyasawa because he fell in love with the princess who is given by another king as a present to King Kyasawa. So King Kyasawa became angry on King Kyasawa.
So a love triangle.
The Prince Kyasawa, yes.
Right. So to escape a love triangle of the princess that both kings had fallen in love with, he went to Chaung Oo and started and he named it he named the village the stream that runs fast because the stream was running faster than him. Was that why?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. It is a love story, a good love story, one we heard for the children when we were young.
I see. Yeah. Right, and that was a story your grandmother told you about the village.
Yeah,
that's great. So, okay, so that's the founding. So then take us through the next several centuries of what happens in Chaung Oo.
Actually, Chaung Oo was at that time a village. Mm-hmm. But after King Kyasawa, in the last days of Bagan era, mm-hmm. There is also a king called King Kyasawa.
And what century is this?
It is also 100 years later only. Mm-hmm. So at the time, King Kyasawa and his mother ran from Bagan to Chaung Oo again because his father was assassinated by the others. So his father lost his throne, and also his father passed away. And then King Kyasawa and his mother came to Chaung Oo, and then they were hiding in a monastery near Dhamma, near Dhamma village. So in that monastery, his mother was hiding from the danger of the king who grabbed the throne from her husband. So she prayed at the Buddha and she offered a rope to the Buddha statue in the pagoda. Mm-hmm. And she wished if her son became a king, she will come back and rebuild the pagoda, and she will gild the pagoda with the full gold, like that. So and then when the family, the mother and her son went back to Bagan after years, and then they were welcomed by the counselors, and then her son became a king. Mm-hmm. And King Kyasawa was very famous for his literature in Tipitaka. Buddhist literatures, right. 3 baskets of Buddhist literatures. Mm-hmm. So he also came back and gilded the pagoda with full gold. and then he erected a stone inscription, which is still existing till now in the pagoda compound. In that stone inscription, it says, in this area, Chaung Oo area, people, national different races, like Ba'o, Lawa. At that time, Wa was called Lao. Ba'o, Lawa. At that time, Wa was called Lawa. Lawa and also Burma and also Karen people amazingly lived in that stone inscription. We can see this until now, until today, in a pagoda festival in a village called Kalaji. In that village, every after the pagoda festival, they are still dancing Karen traditional dance.
Oh, right. So this is highlighting some of the diversity of Myanmar. People listening might not know what a diverse country Myanmar is. The Bamar people are the majority, but there are so many other ethnic minorities that live there now and have lived there before. And as you're discussing from this inscription on the pagoda, even that description
it
way
is
back
strong
when.
evidence.
Strong evidence, right, of the diversity that's always been here.
Yeah.
And so it's also interesting because your village, Chaung Oo, it sounds like it had some repeated stories of kings from Bagan running away for safety and taking refuge there. And so it had this relationship. And actually, today it's called kind of a cute nickname of Little Bagan, right?
Little Bagan.
Yeah. Why is it called that?
Yeah. On map, you can see our area, Chaung Oo and Bagan East. We can see straight up and down. So crossing
north and south, you mean?
North and south,
right.
straight. So crossing the river and ALD river, and then you can, at that time, people from Bagan capital will reach our region. So, and there is also a village called Dongbanla, where the King Kyasawa queen was born. So that area is called Little Bagan. So
this is Chaung Oo?
Chaung Oo, yes.
Right. And why is it called Little Bagan?
Little Bagan, because there are many stupas and temples and ancient pagodas like in Bagan. So it is spreading around, but you will have to have enough time to visit all the temples.
How much time?
Yeah, 3-4 days.
Wow.
You have to, because it is spreading in this village and other villages like that.
Yeah, right. And do you get foreign tourists every year coming to see these sites?
I often take my guests from local or from foreign countries. I usually I am proud of taking them to this area as well.
Yeah, and you are a great local guide and historian. You definitely take care of the people that come. But do you, just being a place with that kind of history, do you tend to see a lot of foreigner tourists walking around and seeing the sites? Is that common?
In Little Bagan area, foreigners come very occasionally. Occasionally, it is very rare to see the foreigners because it is off the beaten track.
Right. And that's so anyone listening to this, Dhamma visitor or otherwise, who's thinking to come to Myanmar, this is a great travel hint of a really special place to go. When I visited there and you were my guide and showed me all these places and imbibed them with local history, I remember thinking, boy, if I was just in Myanmar one time, I would almost rather come here than Bagan. Of course, Bagan has that great history, but with it, you also get the touts that are trying to sell you things and all the other tourists and all the other commotion. And this was just a really peaceful and magnificent set of ruins, one after the other, that was just empty for you to wander through. So it's a really special place with a lot of history and significance to be able to see today.
Of course it is, yes.
Yeah, and you know most of those stories because you've spent your childhood hearing them, and then you also have a curious mind. You've read books, you've talked to local historians, your family has told you things, you've been to all these sites, so you're really a repository of information about some of these great places.
Yeah. My passion to read the books, especially histories and especially biographies, this passion was born by my grandmother. Actually, if I have to say here in this point, if I have to say about my passion to read books is studying from my grandma. She always tells me the stories in the nighttime. And then the first very interesting story she started to tell me was Siddhartha Pagadani.
Mm-hmm.
In that book, it is about the life of Buddha. And then every nighttime, she always tell different stories. So and then I also makes questions to her, and she trained me how to read. And then, okay, you can find this story, you can find this history in this book.
Mm-hmm.
She guided me to read the books. So, and after that, when I read more and more books, I read about the history of my area, and also about the Bagan relationship with Bagan dynasties. So like that. So that's why the information, as much as I know, and I also would like to share with the others. When we started to use the computer in 2009, and at that time, not as an LCD monitor.
Mm-hmm.
My father bought me after I passed a matriculation exam,
Mm-hmm.
and then I used the computer, and then I think 2011 I started to use the internet, and then I also wrote in the Wikipedia about the histories of
You
my
read or you wrote?
I wrote.
So the Wikipedia entry discussing Chaung Oo was written by you from Wikipedia.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's really impressive, because I think for listeners out there that don't know about Myanmar's recent history and access to information, you're really ahead of the curve. I mean, 2012-13 is when the country started to open up. The access to internet was very seldom before that. Just a few years before, we're talking the mid-aughts, the mid-2000s, there's almost not Wi-Fi anywhere in the country. There's almost not access to any kind of internet. So just after the first trinklings of internet are opening up, before the country is really opened, you're already finding your way onto Wikipedia, of all places, and using that to be able to share information in English about your village history, which you've spent your life learning about from your grandmother and from books and from going there. So this passion to learn this information and share it sounds like it came from a very young age on your part.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. About the I love to tell about the history, another history of my area. It is Amien. So now
this is another village, right close to Chaung Oo.
Also a part of Little Bagan.
Mm-hmm, right.
So in Amien village, every Myanmar people knows Uwisara. You will also see a road named Uwisara near the Shotogun Pagoda.
In Yangon,
in
right?
Yangon.
Mm-hmm. So who was Uwisara?
Uwisara was a national hero, and who passed away after his hunger strike for more than 150 days. After hunger strike, he passed away.
In what year?
In the British colony period.
Yeah.
So at that time, there were only two monks who was against the British rule. And one of them is Dhamma from Rakhine, and another one is from our region, Uwisara. So since the British ruler took shoes on the platform of the pagoda, and then there was a protest against him, and also finally it led to the protest against the British rule.
Right. So to back up a little bit, Burmese pagodas and monasteries, some monasteries, but certainly pagodas, are places where you have to remove your shoes out of respect in order to go. And the British did not like removing their shoes. They weren't wearing sandals. They were often wearing these big Western military boots, and
Yes.
they considered it kind of a sign of humiliation and submission, and it took time, and it wasn't their culture. And so there was this big cultural miscommunication and conflict where they insisted on wearing their shoes even on sacred Buddhist pagodas. And the Burmese nationalist movement used this as a protest to start protests about the disrespect for Burmese Buddhist culture. And Uwizara was one of the people behind this particular point of protest. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who
yes.
came from your village?
Not only for that case, but also he also led many activities later for the national independence, and also before General Aung San, and also before Yan Dakin Bibe.
Right. So he was one of the first nationalist leaders that the later ones looked up to.
Yes.
Yeah, and he was a monk as well.
Yes.
Right,
yes.
and he came from your village as well.
That's why there is still, until now, there is some beliefs that monks should also participate in politics. Till now, among the monks.
Can you say more about what you mean by that?
For example, there are two sides. One side is monks should not participate in the politics, and another side, monks should, because even Uwisara and Uodama participated for the national interest, for the national independence. So they were very good examples to protect our race, to protect our country. So they show the examples, and that side supports monks should participate in politics and political activities.
Right. So there's this question that monks, the job of monks is to be a monastic, to not be concerned about the changing of the outside world, and to because the world is always going to change. This is the Buddhist teachings, but their concern should be on ensuring the Dhamma does not go away and teaching the next generation. And then there's another view that, well, no, the monks are looking after the social welfare of the people and of the overall race. And if there's a major problem taking place of those people, then they also have to serve that. And this is interesting because you're referencing one of the, probably the, not one of, but the monk who involved himself in politics more than almost any other of that time period until today. And he came from your village, and he was an example of the one side. It's then interesting to contrast that with another great Burmese monk who came from just outside your village in Moniwa, just maybe 50 years earlier, and this is, of course, Lady Sayadaw. So Lady Sayadaw was the most popular and famous monk of the colonialist era, one of the most important ones. And and we should also say you, again, have a personal connection with Lady Sayadaw's legacy because many of your family members are involved with ladies' monasteries today. Can you share a little more about that?
As I already said, my grandma is the main character of this story. So she was also farmers. So in the times of Lady Sayadaw.
From Chaung Oo? She was
was from Chaung Oo.
Okay.
But she lived, her husband is also a government staff of railway station. And then when they lived in Monywa, at that time, Lady Sayadaw was traveling around the country not to eat the meat or cow, beef, not to eat beef, like that. So at the time, there were also diseases happening all around the country. And then Lady Sayadaw traveled around and made the teachings to the people not to eat beef because they are also benefactors for the farmers because our country is agricultural country. So, and my grandma also listened in one of his Dhamma talk, and then
in person.
In person, and also she has also seen General Aung San in person as well. All right, so she listened in the Dhamma talk, and also she also has till now I have the books written by Lady Seroji regarding about the objections to eat beef like that. At that time, actually in the traditional Myanmar, before the British came in, my grandma even said, as per the books, she said, before British came in, Myanmar people usually eat vegetables, and sometimes there might be some hunters who run into the forest, and they are like rabbits and just small animals. But after the British came in, and then they also brought a culture to eat chicken and also pork and also beef like that. At that time, beef was very popular in Myanmar people, and then Myanmar people like to eat beef a lot. And then farmers are losing their cows, and then Lady Seroji started to, and also at the time diseases were happening. Then Lady Seroji started to make the Dhamma talks and teachings to the people not to eat beef. And also my grandma was also one of the disciples of Lady Seroji. So although we are, my parents and even myself are not farmers, but still now we don't like to eat beef.
That's wonderful. And so your grandmother was a disciple of Lady Sayadaw. She attended some of his sermons. Did she tell you anything about her personal recollection of seeing Lady in person?
She told me once that actually I have never seen, of course, Lady Seroji, but I in my very early age of my young life, I was under the teachings of Mahabodhi Datang. So what she said is, look at Mahabodhi Datang, and his face also looks like Mahalady Sayadaw. Like that. So that's what she remembered, and also
his face. His face.
Yes. And also when she lived in Monyor, and at the time there was no rain in Monyor, and then Lady Seroji went to and fro from one monastery to another, and then he cleaned and he washed the toilets of the Buddhist monks. He always respects the community of Sangha. So after he did these merit deeds, this good deed, and then he made a resolution to rain, and then it rained. So this is my grandma also believed in this story very much.
And she was alive during this time.
Yes.
Yeah, and Lady Sayadaw was from this region of Monywa, Chaung Oo, where you're from. This is a hard place to live. This is a hard climate. Its history is relatively new. The people there haven't been a large community or city that's survived for a long time, because it is a harder place to live. So Lady being from that town, he knew of those conditions, but he still would go back and spend much time there.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's also interesting just to reflect on that. If we reflect on yours and my background and how we came together, your grandmother is a Lady Sayadaw disciple, and that runs in your family, and you remember her recollections. Lady Sayadaw, of course, through his lineage, ended up the Dhamma ended up coming to S.N. Goenka, who taught around the world and had these Vipassana centers. I learned Vipassana meditation in a center of S.N. Goenka tradition in Japan, which eventually brought me to Myanmar, that practice. And so it's interesting that, right,
yes.
so
the generation of Mahalady Sayadaw. We can say new generations of Mahalady Sayadaw.
Right. So you're coming here from your grandmother's stories of witnessing Lady in person, and the Dhamma lessons coming to you more or less directly through her as a vehicle and her experience of being with him. Whereas I'm from America, but I practiced in Japan initially for those 2 years. That was the thing that brought me to want to be in Myanmar, was that tradition and that practice. And so I'm coming on the other end, but then there's that thread connecting all of us and your grandmother and Lady and Goenka. So that's really wonderful.
Yeah, nothing happens without the formal cause.
Right. So I want to get back to initially why I brought up Lady Sayadaw. We were talking about Uwizara being this nationalist monk who was very much using his monastic status to want to be involved in worldly issues, while you also had another great monk living in your area at the time of British colonialism. And how would you characterize what Lady was doing with his being a monk living in colonial times? How would you contrast that with what Uwizara was choosing to do?
As I already said, Uwizara is the national hero for the later people, and Mahaladi Sayadaw was the monk who practiced and who followed up the path only in his writings and teachings, and also to propagate the Buddhism and Buddha's teachings, to spread and share the Buddha's teachings in Myanmar language simply for the very, very rural people. And Uwizara, at the point of Uwizara, if he also, as for me personally, if he did not participate in the political activities, for example, to protect the Myanmar culture, Myanmar Buddhist culture, which we respect, and not to wear the shoes like that. So if he did not protect the culture, and if he did not dare to be against the British ruler, the history will be changed to another form like that. So, and Burmese culture will be also probably disappeared like that. So anyway, for the point of the fact that monks should participate in political activities, I would give you an example. As I already said, my very early age of life was under the teachings of Mahabodhidharma Chaung Sayadaw. Here, since it is connected, let me say, actually I would not like to talk about my personal story, but I also would like to share, because foreigners also should know the rebirth and also the former lives in English language. So Mahabodhidharma Chaung Sayadaw has a brother named Udejaniya. Udejaniya.
And we should say this has no relation to Sayadaw Utejaniya from the Shui Min tradition, which some meditators might know. This is a different person.
This is a different person. Udejaniya is Mahabodhidharma Chaung Sayadaw Unayarada's brother, younger brother. And when both of them were alive, and they were very familiar and friendly to us. And then when they visited my house, and then the two monks told my parents that I was their mother in the former life.
Oh, wow, goodness.
So this is a relationship with also, I can say, because I followed not as tradition, but from my deep heart, I followed the Buddha's teachings. Not because my parents are Buddhist, but because I also had many relationships with the Buddha's teachings and also Buddha's disciples who are the monks.
Yeah.
So anyway, Mahabodhidharma, I will give you an example for the fact that monks should participate in political activities. For example, not directly, this is also another example. One in 2007, actually in 2005 and 6, it was, as far as I remember, it was very, very hard time, and every broadcast, every course, prices are getting higher at the time. And then people were having difficult daily lives, because the prices were increased a lot. And also before 2007 revolution, Shuwayam revolution. My mom and her cousin from Chaung Oo went to Mahabodhi Thaung Seroji to offer meal as a very early breakfast in the dawn time around 4 o'clock. After 4 o'clock, around 5 or 4:30, something like that. So, anyway, at the time, as far as I remember, in those times, when the prices were increased a lot, the Mahabodhi Thaung Sero did not accept any offerings and any donations from the people because he feels very pity on the people. He doesn't want to make the people a burden for him like that. So after that, when the prices go down, and then when we talked about it with the Seyaroji, and then he said, I am also one of the society. I am also one of the Buddhist society. So this is politics also related to everybody in the society. That's why, and from this point, I'm also supporting the fact that monks also should participate in a proper way in political activities. So not only as like Lady Seraphiaji, and he is the role model of Vipassana meditation and every other Buddha's teachings like that.
Right. So how would you characterize Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw's involvement in society? How was he being involved in the society of the day?
All right. Some are hidden stories. I think he should. You can guess what I mean, but I don't want to show you all the story. Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw said to our family, as a question to our family, people are very, very, very poor in the dark times, as we say, before democratic transition. So he said, he asked our family, do you like even a bird? Even a bird does not like to be arrested in the cage.
Mm-hmm.
So what he also usually tried to participate in the political activities, not as a directly, not as a very show up, only very hidden, very behind the people's vision. He was also telling to release the prisoners.
Right, very subtle ways. So there's different ways that it might not be so much a question, should monks participate in the outside world or not? It's more a question to what extent and how are they participating, because you're showing very subtle and careful ways that he's being involved.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Right. So we talked about a little of Lady Sayadaw. Many people are familiar with him, and you gave a brief background of Uizara. We've talked a little bit about Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw. He's extremely well known in Myanmar, one of the most well-known monks of the last 50 years, surely, but I think for meditators outside of Myanmar, they've probably had very little access with his teachings and his life. Can you give us a little bit of background about him?
Can I tell the biographical stories of his life?
Sure. Yeah.
In brief?
Sure, and his teachings, yeah.
Yes. And actually, Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw is very well known for his Buddha Nosati Bhavana meditation.
And what is that?
That means a kind of contemplation, a kind of meditation, which regards the attitudes of Buddha, who is free from defilements, who is free from mental impurities. So to practice, and then we can get our clear mind. When we are recalling his attitudes, we are also at the very short moment, we are also free from anger, free from danger, and free from worries. Especially, personally for me, every time I get worries, every time I get very angry, I usually practice Buddha Nosati Bhavana. So, why he did practice Buddha Nosati Bhavana? It is to tell his biography, life. So, in his very young age, at the age of 20, yes, he suffered. He suffered tuberculosis when he was studying Buddhist literatures in Bakoku, in Chaung Oo, and in Mandalay. At that time, he went to the doctor, and he to take a treatment for his disease. But the doctor knew that his disease was very extremely suffering. He was very thin, and also he is very thin, so he is very coughing. So he said actually he did not want to tell him that you are almost dying. That's what Mahabodhi Sayadaw told our family in person. So he did not want to say go back and you are almost dying. But he said to the monk, he said to Mahabodhi Sayadaw, and please, little young monk, you go back, and are there many hills in your native area, in your region? Yes. And then if yes, so you please go up the hills and walk, and also do breathe in fresh air like that. At that time, he went to his father's village, which is around Mongyua and Chaung Oo. So he went up the hills, and he had a very hard life, and he has only one robe, and he lived in a only very small hut. When the rain comes, he was wet. When the rain stopped and when the sun rises, his robe got dried. Very hard life. So, and finally, after 1 year, he went back to the doctor, and then he checked, and then he was completely feeling well. So what he usually makes like a joke to our family as a friendly manner, he usually says that I am afraid of death. I am afraid of death. That's why I did meditation a lot. He always said that. And also this belief also accepted by all the disciples of Mahabodhi monastery as well.
And he had royal blood, didn't he?
Pardon?
He was connected to the royal family, wasn't he?
Actually, it will be related to the rebirth and Burma lives. So when he suffered the disease, and he thought he was also dying, and then finally he made up mind, if I am dying, I will offer my life to Buddha. And then he made a pilgrimage to Mandalay Hill, and at the bottom of Mandalay Hill, and he found a monk, Chaung Oo Sayadaw. His monkhood name is Unanda Duriya. That monk lived like a crazy monk, and he lived in very dirty robes, and he lived in all his monastery was surrounded by bushes. At the time, he went in the monastery, and then when he saw the monk, and then he prayed and he offered, and then he said to him, I want to take the refuge of you, and to take meditation method, to learn from you how to meditate like that. He learned from him. That monk is the grandson of Kim Min-do. And the British government also offered him an honorable award, Nanga Maharaja. Nanga Maharaja means the chief monk of Sangha, the society of monks, like that. So anyway, he did not accept the Chaung Oo Sayadaw did not accept Mahabodhi Sayadaw at once to be his disciple, and then he tested many things. Finally, he tried to one test. He put a dead body for many days, or the dead body of a dog, and then he put on the table, and then he had lunch after he collected his food. And then Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw, the young monk, also was sitting and also having lunch, but he could not tolerate to this smell of the dead bodies of the dog. And then he, oh my master, why not you abandon this dead body of the dogs? And then he pulled away. So now Sayadaw told him, oh, very good monk. Oh, lady monk, you are very good, except the dead body or dog. Except the test or the dead body or dog, like that.
That was a test?
That was a test.
What was it testing him on?
To test his patience, to test his tolerance, to be a disciple of him. If he is very enthusiastic to learn how to meditate, he just want to try to test him.
So did he pass the test or not?
Only the last test with the dead body or dog.
Right, but this was like a Suba practice?
And the other tests were, he passed the other test. And also now Sayadaw is very outstanding in his extremely, how can I say, in his practice of living in the forest, living under the tree, not living in the house, not living in the building like that.
Dutanga practice?
Dutanga, yes, exactly. Yes,
right.
Yes,
and Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw also?
Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw also went up the hills and also practice meditation, and especially Buddha Nusati Bhavana, and he became relieved from his disease.
I see. And today, Mahabodhi Thaung Sayadaw's, that's his name, right?
Yes,
Bodhi,
yes, exactly. Yeah,
so, right.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So today, Bodhi Thaung Sayadaw in Monywa, his monastery is pretty unique. There's some features that are very unusual to other monasteries. Can you describe that?
Yeah. Actually, Bodhi Thaung means wisdom, insight, knowing. Body means, and the Thaung means 1,000. When he was suffering the disease, he was living in a very small hut under the bo tree, under the banyan tree. Since the bo tree is the banyan tree is under the banyan tree, under the bo tree, Buddha attained the enlightenment. So we also pay respect to the tree, to this type of tree. So when he was living in a small hut under the tree, and very very small trees are grown under the big trees. This is a good sign. And then at the time, people thought, oh, this is not a good sign. And then, but for him, okay, if it is not a good sign, and if I have to die, because I am growing these trees, smaller trees in pots, and to grow the trees, if I have to die, I don't care, and then I will die. And then he started to grow the trees, and then his disease was also relieved, and then he was invited by his uncle, by his father's village people. One his uncle monk passed away in the monastery where the Bodhi Thaung monastery is now. So anyway, he asked the villagers, if you can give me a land to grow the bo trees, I will accept your invitation. I will reside in your monastery. But if you cannot give a land, I will not. So and the villagers purchased a small acres of land, and then finally he grew the trees, bo trees, and with the help of Chaung Oo, who is his master. And with the help of his master, and he tried to grow thousands of bo trees, and then he became well known as Bodhi Chaung Oo, the monk of 1,000 Bo trees.
I see. And
But
what,
now
yeah.
he had grown 10,000 of trees when he was alive.
So he surpassed his goal.
Yeah, but the name of the monastery was not changed into Bodhi 10,000.
Right. Yeah. So there's many Bodhi trees if you go today.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
You will see from the second world's largest Buddha, standing Buddha, and also from the mountains, you will see very green areas of the tropical hot area. In that area, he developed the lake, he developed the dams and the electricities and the schools. He built a lot of development.
So this whole region was impacted with him there. The people's lives became better with some of these initiatives that he was doing. And then also, as you mentioned, he built, there's a standing Buddha, a reclining Buddha, and a sitting Buddha, all three of which are gigantic in size. And approaching from miles and miles around, you just see the countryside, you see the heat kind of boiling off the countryside as you look down the horizon, and then far, far away you see these images kind of poking above this vast rural landscape.
Yes.
Yeah, that was his design?
Yeah, he designed and he made the drawings by himself. And one very interesting story is he usually wanted to build the Buddha statues and pagodas in which inside interior is a hollow type.
That's unusual in Myanmar?
That is his not usual to Myanmar, but this is his own wish and his own design.
Why did he want them hollow?
Okay, for example, when he started to build a big pagoda, at the bottom of the hill where the standing Buddha and reclining Buddha is built, at the bottom of that hill, the pagoda that you will see the golden pagoda, like Shwedagon pagoda. That pagoda is the first giant pagoda he built. So he wanted to build a hollow type inside the pagoda. At the time, he designed, but one of his friends, who is also became famous, and he doesn't want, please do not build a hollow type inside, only build like a solid type. And then he never made a quarrel to him, because he is like a brother for him. So, and then before they started the construction, and then that monk was invited by Bien Uluen monastery to reside, and then he moved there, and then Mahabodhi Chaung could build on his own will the holotype.
Right.
So the holotype, why he wants to build a holotype is like inside the pagoda or inside the Buddha, it is like a cave. In Myanmar traditions and books, and also in poems, in the Himalayas, the Pisaka Buddha Arhats lived in the cave, Nandamu cave, like in Ananda temple in Bagan. So he also wanted to build the holotypes inside.
So he wanted it to feel like a meditative cave.
Yes.
In there. There's also one of the statues has the 31 planes of existence, right?
Yes.
So you can actually, as you walk up the statue to get the view, you pass from the hill realms to the highest diva realms.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, and I haven't been there, but I guess each floor has information about that realm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking to translate those writings, but it couldn't happen yet. Yeah.
He was also influenced by Waitsa practice. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you explain what Waitsa is?
Very interesting.
Yes.
Because my family also follow his path. So Waitsa practice is another type of practice, and not mainly connected to Theravada Buddhism. let me not say it comes from Mahayana or whatever. Let me not say this, but it's in the belief of our local people around Mahabodhi monastery, and also in the society, in the community of the disciples of Mahabodhi Searo, Vajra practice is also a very good, helpful method to spread the Buddha's teachings, to do the great, amazing things. For example, he developed this area, studying Buddha, not only temples and monastery, but also the schools and many other things he developed. And also his monasteries are also in Yangon and also in the US, in New York, in England. So many monasteries he could build. Anyway, so he could do this with the help of Vajra practice as well. To say exactly, he learned not only meditation but also Vajra practice from Unanda Duriya, the Nau Sayadaw, who is the grandson of Kim Min-dong.
What type of Vajra practice did he do?
Alchemy. Yes, alchemy. Actually, in the West, I also have read books about alchemy. Newton also tried. I read about that, but not sure. So anyway, it is very, very different from the Western alchemy. In our oral stories, as I already said, my grandmother's nighttime stories, our past kingdom of Myanmar was built was very, very flourishing with Buddhism, with the help of Shin Izagona, who is a Vajra, and who tried Vajra practice, and his eyes were taken off by the king because he did not pass to make the gold from his alchemy. So anyway, Bagan bi shwe mo ngwe mo ywa. Bagan bi shwe mo ngwe mo ywa means gold rain, silver rains in Bagan. That's why today people still believe that that ancient people could build a lot of temples and pagodas with the help of Shin Izagona, who is a Vajra.
So it was the Vajra practitioners that allowed the Theravadan Buddhist practice to become established for the first time and then flourish throughout Myanmar. This is what you're saying is a local belief,
since that time, in alchemist, in Myanmar tradition, alchemist history, we can say that it starts from Bagan era.
Right. And so there's the Vajra conversation. This is a whole other topic that we don't have time to delve into now, but it is another kind of practice that exists in Myanmar. And here with Bodhi Datang Sayadaw, we see someone who is practicing Vipassana and other techniques from the scriptures. And as you talked about the Bodhi no Sati, and other meditative practices, but he's also a Vajra practitioner, and so it's not quite so black and white in terms of what he represents or what he's practicing.
Yes, the main essence of his use of alchemy is not only alchemy. As you said, combination of alchemy, Buddha no Sati, Bhavana, meditation, and also with alchemy combination. So the main essence is not for greed, not for our lay people's family problems, not for our wealth, but only it should be brightest for spreading the Buddha's teachings. And so invisible traditional Vajras can help you to spread Buddha's teachings and also to build the pagodas, to build the temples, like that.
Right. And this could be something that for foreigners who are practicing some traditional form of Vipassana, outside in their countries, and they have this image of Myanmar being the place where all these Vipassana techniques were maintained and then shared. Learning about the diversity of practice here and the different levels of engagement that exist, it can sometimes be confusing seeing where it all fits together and where how it all makes a complete picture.
Yeah. As for the foreigners, it will also be a very different practice as well.
Right. And so Mahabodhi Tawang Sayadaw was one of the great monks and teachers of the last 50 years. It's certainly very recognizable in Myanmar. And you say that he and his brother informed your family that you were actually the mother from a previous lifetime. How did that, when did you learn that? How old were you when you were informed of that, and how did that make you feel?
As a relationship with a Buddhist monk in Myanmar, I believe to have a child, a monk, to have a son as a monk, for his whole life, it is a very, very great, bliss for her or for the parents. It is also a good deed, so the parents cannot go to the hell, or the parents cannot it is a good deed. Since it is a good deed, the parents who has got the son as a monk and then as a nun, and then they can reborn, they can be reborn as a human being, like that. So I cannot say any information because I cannot know these very, very mysterious thing. This is a mysterious thing, but only to hear his sayings, and our family also believed that. That's why we have to do good merits, good deeds, more and more and more, and also to support the Buddha Sasana, Buddha's teachings, to support the Sangha, the monks, like that. So this is our personal belief.
And how old were you when you were informed?
26.
26, yeah.
Yes.
Did it come as a shock to you?
Pardon?
Did it come as a surprise or a shock to learn this?
You mean I was shocked to hear I was reborn. I was his mother.
Yeah, were you shocked to hear that?
Actually, I would say completely. My mother had me in her pregnancy, and then the Sayadaw said to other disciples, to the other people in Mongyua, don't lie. I even met her in the Pagoda festival very recently. She said, at that time, no X-ray, no ultrasound. So my mother did not take ultrasound at the time. So, but Sayadaw said that will be a boy, and he said he will be the most beautiful, something like that, because as a belief of his mother. But as for me, instead of saying I was shocked, but I since I know this information, I practice Buddha's teachings more and more in my daily life. The most beautiful means I have to make my mind as the most beautiful.
Right. If the Sayadaw and his brother knew this from the time that you were in the womb and then after being born, I wonder if it affected the way they related to you. Did they relate to you with this warmth and affection and gratitude of having been your mother in a former incarnation, or did they put this knowledge somewhere else and recognize you for what you were in this life as being a young boy like any other young boy, and they're a monk who has a responsibility and duty to any young boy they meet? How did this knowledge affect their relationship with you?
Since they know that I was his mother in the former life, they made very memorable teachings in our families, in our life. So do very, very precious teachings. His teachings are very, very precious for our daily life to practice.
I'm also just thinking, if I was in his place and there was someone that was so close and so dear to me that I had such a personal connection with and had passed away, and then I knew somehow with certainty that this baby is that other being reborn, that's another level of kind of detachment and anatta, because I would want to transfer all of my love and previous connection from another lifetime into this new life. And I would not want to let go of that other relationship. I would want to, everything that other relationship meant, I would want to impose that onto the new relationship to not lose that feeling with how important that person had been to me. And yet this, if you believe in karma and believe that this is a next lifetime, even though it's a next lifetime, they have no memory or knowledge of who they were in a former relationship. So I put myself in their position and wonder how they would be able to relate to what is now their mother but doesn't remember being their mother.
Yeah. As for me, I also do not have any memory. If I was his mother or not, I have no memory. Only believing his sayings, and I have to make my life more beautiful and beautiful with the teachings of him and with the teachings of Buddha.
I found Zaw's interview really interesting. Not only is he a wealth of information about his area, which you would expect of a guide, right? But the impressive thing is just understanding how Myanmar works and how he came to that, that lovely relationship he had with his grandmother, and that, in that sense, it's like an oral tradition and self-taught, and just that initiative he takes to Google things and just to learn. It was such an inspiring story.
Yeah, he's a really special guy. I had met him online and corresponded for years when he was helping with the guidebook project and learning about the region and the hometown and contributing that way. And I've met him several times since, and really fortunate he came to my place and recording studio to do this interview. I'd been asking him for some time for that, and he's just a gem. I mean, he's such an energy of brightness and good feeling and just Dhamma wisdom and goodwill when you meet him. And I think a lot of that comes out. And I think also just the level of memorization and how he's able to retain facts. Sometimes I read things and hear things, they just, especially as we get older, they just go in one ear and out the other. And it's just so impressive during this talk and this talk was not planned. It was not scripted. He didn't know what was coming. And it's basically, as the talk progressed, it's like, hey, so tell me about this. Hey, so tell me about this. Well, what about this one? And he just kind of takes a breath and he's like, oh yeah, well, that's interesting because this book said this, but my grandmother said this, but this monk I talked to said this, but then I thought about this. And I remembered the guy I met at the pagoda who corresponded with this. And we have to say, this is not in a country that through the brutal dictatorship has had its educational system torn apart, as we learned with Zaw Win's interview.
Right.
This is not a skill you really come across in a lot of people, is this high fascination of wanting to learn knowledge, critically reflect on it, retain it, be able at the drop of a dime to be able to relay certain stories. He's really an impressive guy.
Right. Exactly. And the region he's from is really interesting too. So to have all those skills in that region, which it's by and large is kind of off the tourist map, Western tourists at least. Not many people go there, and it's rich in history. And then there's this gem of a guy who knows so much about the area.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And this was one of the places in the Meditator's Guidebook project that I led. This region was one of several that we put a lot of emphasis and focus in, just in how important it was, even though it was off the beaten track. And there's a poem I'm looking for that what you said reminded me of. You said it was I can't remember the words you used, but it was a bit outside of of what people know. And there's this great poem by, and I'll read an excerpt from it. It's from David Lambert, who's a meditator, and he went there on a pilgrimage with S.N. Goenka, I think it was, when he visited, and wrote a poem about it. And there's this line describing Monywa. And here it is, quote, "Beyond the conventional radar, this is the heart of yogi tourism, where foreign meditators come to explore the heartland of their spiritual souls. For some, this is the area where it all began." That was a poem I always liked. I just love that area where it all began, and we'll get to the history of that, of what I learned in that research. It's funny because that region actually goes way, way back, and there's some historians that have suggested that the earliest human civilization in the entire region of that part of the world might have come from there, or at least one of the first human communities was there. So it's really a place in the earliest forms of humans that can be traced back. But, today it's not a tourist town. Like, the thing it's most famous for is its rough cotton blankets and raw bamboo. It's a trade hub for India. There's this Tazangmon festival in November that's kind of famous for locals, but there's really not much there. I think if you looked at A Lonely Planet, it would take a page or two of the sites for the normal tourist to see.
Right. Well, sounds like there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, well, as we go on and trace the history, so Michael Charney is a scholar who's written a bit on it, and he's really done some good research, and he called it, quote, one of Burma's political and cultural frontiers. And so that's a good image to have as you're thinking of this history, as kind of a frontier land, something that was always a bit outside of the Bamar kingdom, and that was a meeting place of different tribes and different groups. Charney describes how there'd be Kachin and Naga. These are ethnic groups. Kachin and Naga clans that would mainly keep to themselves, but they lived and kind of roamed in these areas. And then parts of the Chin Hills west of the river here in the Chinwin were never under the dominion of a Bamar king. So there's really been some independence. And there's also been some shifting controls of who was in charge of it. So, for example, there was like Shan, which is another ethnic group. Shan king established himself north of the river. And even the Indian kingdom of Manipur controlled parts of the upper West Bank. So there were different peoples living and also different peoples that were controlling and leading this region as well. And the Bamar didn't arrive until really in force until the mid-18th century. And most of them that came at that time were escaping the Anglo-Burmese wars of the 18th and 19th century. That's when the Bamar arrived. And that brings us a little bit closer to modern history. When the British took over and annexed the country, they made it their regional headquarters in 1886. And so what had always been this kind of remote, wild land, this place where different tribes kept to themselves but kind of mingled, it now became this kind of frontier outpost of the British Empire.
Right. Hey, just for clarification, that stone inscription that says, that all these different ethnicities lived there. Right. I was under the impression that they were all like fully mingled, but they all basically, it's more like they coexisted there, right? Or was it more like they came in waves of who was dominant there, or, can that be fleshed out a little bit?
Right. So that's a really good question. And actually, I should clarify that I'm talking more about Monywa, which is the big city today in the region. And for the most part, Zaw was talking about Chaung Oo and the little Bagan area of Amiens, which is more of his hometown. And his village and the little Bagan Amiens village, those have incredibly long histories. I mean, those have histories of 1,000, 2,000 years. And even though these are pretty close to Monywa, I'm relating more of what I know about the Monywa history. So as Zaw described that plaque, it could have been a mingling in his village. And even though Monywa was close by, they could have some kind of different history. But I don't know. That would be a question for Zaw. Was this a sign of real intercultural development and these communities living together, interacting together, or were they separate in some way?
Right. Either way, I think it's interesting, though, right? I mean, because even the coexistence would be something. I mean, I guess you do see that in some places, even in Yangon, but, between the, Sule Pia, or by the pagoda there, there's the Muslims and the Buddhists there. I mean, those are not ethnicities raised so directly, but, there's a pretty peaceful coexistence there. So, yeah, that's curious. But anyways, you have more. It sounds like you know a lot about Monywa.
Yeah, and and going back to just diversity in Myanmar, Myanmar's always been just such an incredibly diverse country, and this is relevant to the British taking over. Is that the British, in their colonial system, very much wanted to classify and categorize things, whether it was botany or animals or insects or ethnic groups, and so one of the criticisms in modern Burmese scholarship of the colonial period is that they really tried to put people in cultural ethnic boxes of identity that often were more fluid in terms of the way people actually lived. And so even the way we try to understand ethnicity now in Myanmar, both today as well as in times before, is kind of a superimposed British formal system onto something that was more fluid in nature. But in any case, catching up to where the British were in 1886 when they made it their headquarters, it then became kind of like this regional outpost. So we should take a step back and kind of look at Myanmar as a whole. So there's always been these places in Myanmar where the conditions were not so ideal for actually people and civilization, but they attracted a certain kind of monastic. Because when you're talking about a Buddhist society, you're not just talking about conditions that are good for lay people and society and economy and civilization and modernity to flourish. You're talking about a monastic following a very strict discipline that are kind of looking for a different thing from society. Sometimes they're actually looking for conditions that are livable, but not really all that ideal or luxurious because it gives way to a certain type of practice. And Moniwa was one of those places. So even though the Bamar only came there very recently and mainly as war refugees and then as part of the colonial empire that was built up, monks have been coming to Moniwa for the last 1,000 years. At that time, it was a very remote, forested place of practice where they could live in seclusion. There was a dense forest far from the capital, but maybe some well-wishers and donors who would give to them on daily alms rounds. So it has this history of a really rugged and harsh place where only the hardy went. Actually, if I can give another quote by Charney in describing just the severity of the land, he said, quote, "The harshness of the Chinwin environment and its relatively low population base may have dissuaded all but the hardiest monks," end quote. So it's always had a little bit of that history. It's always kind of interesting because when monks might come to like a wild area that's uncivilized, and they come there because they don't want civilization. They want to be in this remote place of practice where they can really work hard and work towards liberation and maybe not be so comfortable in the body, but work for a greater comfort in the mind. But as they start to come to these places and they start to gain renown, more and more followers come. And so they actually end up counterintuitively being this kind of civilizing agent over time. That's what happened here as well. And in Moniwa, there actually became a kind of competition between city and forest monks, the forest monks who came to live in these remote, rugged places, and then the lay supporters that came to support them, and then the civilization they brought, and then the city monks who came to be closer to those lays that weren't venturing into the forest. And this became so fierce that on at least one occasion, there's record that it even spilled over into violence between the city and the forest monks. I'm not exactly sure what the nature of their dispute was, but this tension developed between these forest monks who would come to live ruggedly, and then the city monks that act as more of a modernizing agent.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying that the forest monks came first, but there must have been some small village there for support. But then basically you're saying that as they attracted more support and more people, then they became kind of the gateway to growth of the area. And then on the coattails of that come the city monks and establish themselves. And then over time, there's developed a kind of a feud between the two parties. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this dichotomy between the city and the forest monks, this goes back to the Buddhist times. There's Pali words that I won't try to pronounce because I'll probably mess them up, but there are Pali words that represent this dichotomy between what it was like to be a monk living in the city and supporting those lays closer to you and often living a more comfortable life, and those forest monks who eschewed and avoided the more modern developments and just went to live by themselves. And that's also a theme we see in the Moniwa region is the people that wanted to live, the monks, the monastics that wanted to live a more rugged life, and those that then came to settle in a more relaxed way among the city.
Right.
So anyway, what was really interesting is you have this kind of backwards remote region, this frontier land that would completely change the country in the 18th century, politically as well as monastically. So now we're going a bit before. I'm going to describe what was happening monastically a bit before the British came, and then describe what happened a bit after they came. So we're on these kind of competing timelines. So interestingly, this was also a place that produced some of the best fighting men in the Bamar Empire, especially for King Bodapaya, maybe because it was this rough, really harsh land. And so it not only did rugged monastics go there, but the people living there were some of the best fighting men in the empire as well.
Right. Like tough places produce tough people,
right.
huh?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Good point. So what was interesting, though, in terms of the monastics, is there had been this point of contention between different schools of Burmese monks that was being argued for over a century. And I won't go into the details of that for a limited time, but monk after monk, head sayed after head sayed, king after king was trying to resolve this technical detail, and they weren't able to be successful until this time that some of these Monywa monks played a role in that. And they won this textual argument, and their group became known as the Dhamma Restoration. And through today, Dhamma is the biggest sect of Burmese monks. It's about 85%. So they are the orthodoxy today. And that orthodoxy was established by a very small group of Monywa monks that basically stress the importance of looking at the textual accuracy of the scriptures, of the Pali Canon. So rather than following the regional tradition of something, or the tradition in the villages, or what the elder monks did, they argued that you had to go back to the sources in the scriptures. And so their way of looking at the practice and the monkhood and Buddhism as a whole became the orthodoxy from the 18th century on. And it was really this very small group of monks from the Monywa region that came from nowhere to win this argument and then become the orthodoxy. And Charney just does an excellent job of showing how these remote regions were able to gradually become the orthodoxy and set the standard for how monkhood and Buddhism were to be followed through today.
Right. That's fascinating. Yeah, I didn't know that background. Thanks.
Yeah. And so that leads us further along the timeline. And actually, interestingly enough, those monks that stress the textual accuracy, known as the Dhamma Restoration, they themselves trace their lineage back to the forest, the early forest monks that came centuries earlier to the Monywa region. I don't know how accurate that was, but it's just, obviously it's a good look. But in any case, that leads us to the last point, which I think, and what makes me so excited about this, because I want to set up my last point and kind of build some tension for what the big reveal is going to be for those that might not know. And that's that when you're a meditator today and you just get this practice, you go to a course or you read a book or you get some benefit from this or that, you don't really know where it came from. You don't know the historical trajectory of how everything that came before landed with you. And that's what we're about to get to here, because all of what I just said about the region, the Dhamma Restoration, the British, all of that paved the way for a young monk from Monywa named Ashin Nyanyadaja, who would one day walk into Lady Forest and take the name of Lady Forest and become Lady Sayadaw. So Lady Sayadaw grew up several decades after the Dhamma Restoration had taken place. So he grew up in an environment where textual accuracy and adhering to the Pali Canon was the most important thing, this kind of scholarship. And as anyone who knows about Lady Sayadaw's life would know, he was an avid reader. He consumed everything around him. And this was at a time when scholarship was the way to advance in the monkhood. And so his whole training was predicated on this group of monks from this region, all the more promoting this Dhamma Restoration that became his world as he grew up as a young monk. Oxford Sayadaw, a contemporary monk, has pointed out in an essay that he wrote, a thesis statement, that Lady Sayadaw benefited from these more open scholastic opportunities that were emerging at the time, and that if he had grown up at a different time or place, such as today, because Oxford Sayadaw is very critical of the educational environment today, that Lady Sayadaw would not have become Lady Sayadaw. And as we also know, or as some people know, maybe it's news for meditators listening today, but in any case, when Lady Sayadaw reached these great heights of academia and became one of the most famous and respected and even controversial scholarly monks in the royal capital of Mandalay, what did he do but left these heights of scholastic study to wander into a forest, into a rugged forest, to live under trees, to live in caves. And it's kind of like, knowing this Monywa history, it's like, he had some Monywa blood in him. He's he grew up in this rough, rugged environment. And even as he became this great scholar, he went back into that. And just to put a cap on it for those who don't know who Lady Sayadaw is, he is in the lineage of S. and Goenka. So Lady Sayadaw taught Sayataji, who taught Ubaken, who taught Goenka. And so Goenka's worldwide mission of spreading Vipassana all around the world, and all the meditators who've benefited, all the people who've come on the show to talk about how much they've benefited from taking these courses and how they've gone deeper into Burma Dhamma, all of this came from Lady Sayadaw. As David Lambert said, this is where it all began with Monywa. And what makes me so excited to tell this story is that we're not just talking about Lady Sayadaw, but we're talking about the decades and the centuries and even the 1,000 years before Lady Sayadaw came on the scene to understand his environment and his culture and his context. And I think this is more than just intellectual entertainment. I think that knowing these things really has us examine how we're part of this living history of trajectory that is still continuing through today and the story that's still being told.
Right. So not necessarily a lineage of practice, but an influence of style, both in the referencing the scriptures directly as a source of authority, and also the style of being a tough monk. I mean, that maybe tough's not quite the right word there, but yeah, hardy monk. Yeah. And then living in the forest. And so that inclination to want to be a forest monk and to live in more remote places, as well as the scriptural influence of going directly to the scriptures,
yes,
is what that influence is. And yeah, that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting, huh?
Yeah, that's cool. I think when I was a Goenka meditator, I was always looking for just the practice lineage, but there's, and that's hard to find if you go, I mean, they haven't found it yet going back before Ledi, but nonetheless, these influences are still important as far as other factors go.
Right, absolutely. And Lady Sayadaw didn't come from nowhere. He was influenced by his time and place, by his contemporaries, by his seniors, by his culture. And so learning about the influences that made Lady Sayadaw inform the decisions Lady Sayadaw made, and as his teachings eventually reached us as meditators in whatever form or place or age we were, it just gives a greater context for how decisions were being made and how that transmission happened. So it's not like just this magic, like, oh, a 10-day course is here, I'm just going to go and learn these things. But it actually gives us this kind of appreciation and curiosity for how did this get to that?
Right. I'm always supportive of relying on the text for influence. I think there were, thousands of years where we got away from that. I mean, I was reflecting on, Eric Braun's book really brought home the point. I just kind of didn't occur to me that, like, well, without a printing press, we take for granted now that we have, I mean, even before the internet, we had libraries, we had printed books, we had access to scripture. And for thousands of years, that wasn't the case. So you still see this. I mean, this kind of reminded me when I was listening to Zaw, how he was learning from his grandmother. And that's kind of the beautiful part of oral tradition. And at the same time, like, it's recommended to compare what you're hearing from a teacher to what the Buddha said. And really the only two eras where you could ever do that were in the time of the Buddha, or near the time of the Buddha, where people, at least the people you're learning from, were learning directly from the Buddha. But after a few generations, that's lost. And all you have is this chain where, it's all oral transmission, and it's very difficult to cross-check. You could go to other teachers and kind of hear and maybe average out what, if there's any discrepancies. But nowadays we have the internet, so, this was all kind of pre-printing press. The printing press came to Myanmar about during Ledi's
Right.
lifetime. So that was one of the conditions.
Yeah, right. And we should just give a shout out. You're referencing the Eric Braun book called The Birth of Insight, which is a fantastic book, recommended reading for any listener, The Birth of Insight. And that is about the life and legacy of Lady Sayadaw. The book I was referencing here was Michael Charney, which is not so much about Lady Sayadaw, but more about the region and the background that led to Lady Sayadaw eventually being born and becoming a monk. But both these books are great resources for the meditator.
Right. Eric Braun's book's great. And combined with Charney's book, it really rounds out and gives a kind of more full picture of not only Ledi's life, but what came before it. I think in a combination, it really fills things out. That's great. And you had mentioned earlier about Zaw Win's area being Little Bagan. This is a different topic, but, I wanted to, I think about places like Bagan and places where there's lots of pagodas. And, I came in with an attitude of minimalism, and seeing a kind of almost like a decadence and wasting of effort and time and money, around these kinds of things. And that's changed, I remember, well, it's actually still kind of mixed. So sometimes I think it can be overdone. But I remember the first time I came to Myanmar on a pilgrimage with U Goenka and other meditators from that tradition. And it was magical. I mean, in lots of different ways, right? So even though the mind just couldn't be critical at that point, because going on a trip and being so mindful with other people and going through this, I guess Goenka sets it up too in a way that's almost like mystical, like this land of Dhamma, and then you go around there with that kind of filter on already and meditating with people and being surrounded with meditators. And then every hillside, so even places that aren't as densely built up with pagodas as a place like Bagan or Little Bagan, it seems like on every other hill, at least, there's some golden spire. And they're just like these little anchors all throughout the country. I live in Thailand now. It's the same thing. So you can kind of take it for granted after a while. But if I'm mindful of it, then I can use those as these little anchors or reminder. Hey, Buddhism. Hey, Dhamma. Hey, awareness. I can use it as a cue to be aware. And so at that time on that trip, we were on a bus driving, like for example, from Yangon to Mandalay, and there, it's just even in the middle of nowhere, it seems like there'll be a temple or a pagoda, up on the hill, and it's just one of those, we've talking kind of about before in other interviews and stuff about the linear track of Western practice of just being about sitting and how you come to these traditional places and there's a lot more ways to kind of round out the practice with other practices, and other. So in that sense, pagoda building is a practice and it can have an effect of bolstering faith, of reminding people of the teachings. I mean, there's so many ways it could positively affect people, and that becomes part of practice as well, part of your path. So yeah, I just wanted to say a little something about that. It's not so much, it can seem like decadence, but it's actually can be a beautiful and helpful thing. So Bagan, 1,000 years later, still, I'm not sure exactly how old it is, but, centuries and centuries of inspiring people. And even today, even people that aren't Buddhists, that come there to visit and there's some sense of, there's something there for people.
Yeah, it reminds me of after living in Myanmar for a couple years, I had the realization that every little hill, every little stump, every mountain, every cliff, every crag had a little pagoda on top. And when I started looking at other countries and traveling in other places, it's like, well, usually anywhere that you have a view or you have a bit of remoteness, that's where you have like the golf course or the mansion or the person with private property or something like that. So it's really the more rich and elites that own those areas. Whereas in Myanmar, it's always a testament to the Buddhist teachings. And it's this place that's free and open for all. It's often the cleanest place in the area. It's the quietest place. It's the place with often the least trash and, the nicest tiles and the biggest trees. And it's a place where anyone can come and get a bit of silence and a bit of meditation practice if you want that. You can sit in front of a Buddha statue and you can meditate. You can make offerings. You can recite suttas. You can take refuge in the precepts, any number of things. And it's this selfless giving of a donor who has provided this on top of the hill for then anyone, rich or poor, to come and take advantage of this public place to deepen their faith. And it reminds me as well as the interview we had with Jose Molina on a recent podcast where he described, so this was an American expat meditator who left the country due to the coronavirus pandemic, everything shutting down. And once he was out of Myanmar, and after having lived there for a couple of years, he realized that the absence of just not seeing monastics on the street, which are also a testament and a faith in the Buddhist teachings, just like pagodas are, that just being exposed to this no longer was harder for him than he would have imagined it would have been, because these living testaments or structural testaments to the Buddhist teachings are this kind of constant reminder of the path and of the practice.
Right. And there's something to, even in the city, in the countryside, or on top of a hill, whatever it is, there's something about entering that kind of island of possible awareness, but that all that goes into that, but even just coming up to the perimeter of a place and then, just taking a moment to take off your shoes and walk barefoot through the place, it's almost like that act of stopping to take your shoes off and then entering the place. Fortunately, they are like the cleanest places, and a nice cool feeling tile on your feet, and then kind of slows me down, and then I walk around.
Right. And looking at this history of taking shoes off at a pagoda, I refer largely to Saving Buddhism, which is a book by Alicia Turner, who actually will be an upcoming podcast guest on this series. It's a great book, Saving Buddhism, and she has a whole chapter on this issue of wearing shoes. So she relays in the book how the issue of wearing shoes on a pagoda platform is traced not to a foreigner, not to the British, but to one of the country's most famous monks in the late 19th century, actually. This was Okpo Sayadaw. And so linking back this Dhamma orthodoxy that started in the Monywa region, which we referenced just a little earlier, now Dhamma has become this orthodoxy. They set the tone. They're the conservative faction. And Okpo Sayadaw was a bit of a reactionary monk. And he purposely wore his shoes on a pagoda to challenge the Dhamma way of doing things. His reason for doing so was that he was arguing that the mental intention was more important than the action. So in other words, because he did not have a mental intention to show disrespect, he was able to do an action which the orthodoxy had ruled disrespectful. So this revered Sayadaw wore his shoes in the 1890s at pagodas. And this was his reason for doing so. But what happened instead was this outcry that there was a challenge to the accepted norms. And this indicated that there was this precipitous and dangerous decline of the sasana. It was a warning cry that the Buddhist teachings are going to vanish in our lifetime because now we have monks that are just blatantly violating the respect by wearing their shoes around a pagoda. So this is actually where Alicia Turner begins her story of tracing wearing shoes at a pagoda, and then it turned into something else as the decades followed.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I really have an issue with this idea of the sasana falling apart for things like this. I think, I like taking shoes off, and I do think it's a good reminder. I do think that conservatism can go too far, to the point where you're following rules and think if you don't, things fall apart, and you're actually not aware, and you've lost that discernment of whether there's an awareness and what is the intention and what is really the most important thing. So yeah, you can wear shoes on a pagoda platform in a disrespectful way. And you can also just not be mindful of it. And that's not then disrespectful. I think it's kind of an economy of mind to just rely so heavily on rules. But the whole point of Dhamma isn't that kind of economy of mind. It's to bring awareness to things and look into them deeper, and to understand how things work, So the sasana declines when we lose awareness and that ability to discern and gain wisdom rather than, I think it goes so far now as it's like, hey, these are the rules. This is the way to do it. And the sasana is following these rules and the sasana breaks when you don't, and if you don't, it's disrespectful. I think that, I think to control the masses, maybe that's useful. But as far as the Dhamma goes, it's about, like looking into things and having discernment. So I have some issue with those conservative ideas.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting because another theme we're seeing in this talk is things that are relevant today were also relevant 100 years ago, were also relevant 1,000 years ago, were also relevant during the Buddhist time. So these are fundamental themes that are contrast to spiritual society and lay society. And in any case, to continue the story, so the next thing that happens is there's this Irish monk, U Dhammaloka, and actually a biography has just been written about him by Alicia Turner and Lawrence Cox, and that's another future episode that we have planned to interview Lawrence and hear more about U Dhammaloka, which I'm very excited about. He's one of the first Westerners, a socialist, that ordained in Myanmar. And in any case, he confronted this Irish monk, late 19th century, early 20th century, confronted an off-duty Indian policeman who was wearing shoes at a pagoda festival. And U Dhammaloka also framed the argument following the criticism of Okpo Sayadaw's act, in which the wearing of shoes at a Buddhist holy site was seen as kind of an overt attack on the Buddhist teachings that needed to be defended fully in order to support the strength of the sasana. So now it starts to become, after these two acts, it's in the minds of people as like something that is associated with the survival of the sasana. And so then at this point, different Burmese groups are taking up the cause, and they start putting pressure on local pagoda trustees all over the country to prevent anyone from wearing shoes at the pagodas. This was a change, of course, from previous practice. So now signs start to go up at various pagodas where the trustees agree with this or are pressured into it, that are announcing that no one can contribute to the downfall of the sasana by wearing their shoes at these pagoda sites.
Yeah, as if the Buddha wanted to focus on whether you wear shoes or not. Like, is that the sasana?
Right. Right. So now enter the Europeans into the mix because, of course, the British are controlling the country. And some of the Europeans did relent, and they saw this as kind of an act of basic kindness and respect to another country's customs. It's said today, you walk into a European church, you take your hat off. You walk into a Burmese pagoda, you take your shoes off. This is just the custom that you do, and depending on where you are. But the Buddhists carried on in the fear this was really a decline of the sasana. And they felt that any person of any religion would suffer bad karma for showing disrespect. For the Buddhists particularly, this could generate a communal bad karma that would be simultaneously carried by all and would degrade the Buddhist teachings for everyone. So this was like, if Buddhists and non-Buddhists continued to walk on pagoda grounds with shoes, that would develop into a communal bad karma that would seriously threaten the survival of the sasana. And so this was a fundamental difference that Alicia Turner points out, that even though the European non-Buddhists and the Burmese Buddhists might have a similar view in not wanting to wear shoes at pagodas, their reasons for those views that they're holding are quite different depending on their background.
Yeah, on the one hand, I'm actually totally in support of taking shoes off. And yet I very much sympathize with Okpo Sayadaw because I think his point was lost. Now it can so easily become about wearing shoes or not wearing shoes. And it kind of crystallizes around that. And then the Dhamma's not there anymore. And, I have a feeling that he was trying to shake that up and go back to discernment of the Dhamma, of intention, for example. So I think it is polite to, especially when you visit other countries, to follow their customs and be respectful. And in that sense, I've already talked about how I like to take my shoes off, and I think the British had really tall boots, right? They didn't want to unlace them all, or that I've heard something like that. But I wear flip-flops, so it's easy. So
Exactly. Yeah, well, that leads to the next point. So this is where things really come to a head because so the year is 1916. You have U Thein Maung. He's an attorney as well as a trustee of a pagoda in Prom, now Phrae, which is in kind of central Myanmar. And he installed a sign stating that all visitors, with no exceptions, must remove their footwear. This was just a local trustee, a local pagoda trustee, following this kind of religious nationalist norm that was starting to take place and take shape. But what happened was the British viceroy was due to visit the town where this particular pagoda had this sign, and was told by the authorities that they were following the guidance of the trustee. And so now you have a situation where a British viceroy is visiting the small pagoda and is being asked to remove his shoes. This is a big deal, and what to do. And the colonial government, they tried to censor discussion in the editorial pages of the newspaper prior to the visit because they didn't want bad press. And the British government, after some of the problems in India 50, 75 years earlier, they had this policy of trying to be neutral in religious matters anywhere in the world they were colonizing, just to not take sides and to try to be neutral in it. But now you really have things coming to a head with this viceroy's visit. And this was picked up, this issue and this potential confrontation was picked up by the YMBA, which is the Young Man's Buddhist Association, influenced by the YMCA in the West. And they took on this issue to adapt a countrywide campaign that the British should prevent anyone from any background, from any position, from wearing shoes at any pagoda site. This is then becoming this kind of rallying call of the nationalist YMBA, which General Aung San, who became the first leader of Burma after it got its independence, obviously the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, this became a rallying cry to protect their religion, protect their culture, protect their sasana, to stop anyone from wearing shoes at a pagoda site. And this became one of the tenets of the nationalist movement, and still a very sensitive thing today, obviously, that one should not wear shoes at any pagoda site. And this is some of the background where it came from. And of course, U Wizara was a nationalist monk from this region where Zaw came from. Zaw talked about his biography, and one of his core principles was this. But in telling where we got today, the really interesting thing that I got from Alicia Turner's book is where this started from. I never would have guessed that it was this revered monk who was protesting against the orthodoxy, and doing so in this kind of weird, awkward way of wearing shoes intentionally at pagoda to try to prove a point, that was actually the impetus for how it developed into this nationalist movement that took on a much different tone and tenor, and that's still today. And one never would have thought where it would have come from.
Yeah, it illustrates a point. I just think it's ironic because actually the Sayadaw, I think if we look into what he was doing, it wasn't, I mean, nowadays it's become just about wearing shoes or not wearing shoes, and he wore shoes, therefore he was disrespectful. And I think the whole point was lost. And actually the irony of it here is, I think, losing that discernment of being able to look into what's really going on somewhere. Losing that is losing the sasana, because that's what the teaching, that's what the teaching is. So it's like, you know, right. And I think, and it's just an interesting illustration of how someone is actually trying to help get back to the essence of the Dhamma is then ostracized as an enemy of the Dhamma and of the sasana.
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of twists and turns.
You mentioned Uwizara as well, and he's held up, I think it was said that he's held up as a sort of a role model for modern nationalists. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know enough about his history, but, you know, there's this idea of, you know, whether monks should be involved in politics or not. And they hold up certain acts of the past in order to justify being involved politically. So I don't know Uwizara's case, but there are times when we're actually protecting Buddhism. And there are times when we're actually getting involved for the welfare of the people. It is, I don't think, I've never read anywhere in the scriptures, and I've read the Vinaya and studied it for years. I don't see anywhere where that's the role of the monk. is to take care of the general welfare of the people of a country. The role of a monk is to, as far as I understand it, is to go deep into study and practice so they can be free of suffering. And in that welfare of the people, helping people to whatever their proclivity is to come out of suffering as well.
Right.
And so, if there's an actual physical threat to Buddhism, then they might, in a very skillful way, learn how to engage with that. But then if that's not necessarily the case, so I don't know if Uwisara was rallying against an actual threat to Dhamma or just getting involved in politics. I think there's a clear line. There's a reason that you're not supposed to get involved in politics as a monk. You're not supposed to hold any kind of offices, that kind of thing. And you be careful about how you meet with people in office too. Like there's a rule about not meeting with people in high offices in private, because you come out of that as a monk and people see you in with that person in private. And then that officer or that person in politics and government might then make a big decision that affects everyone. And there's a correlation there, but they may have made that decision that had nothing to do with you talking together, but people will think that. Or could think that. So, you have to be careful about who you meet and how you meet them even. So even at that level, monks had to be careful.
Yeah, right. And when you mention how monks are only told to really get involved when the sasana or Dhamma is threatened, well, that's all in the eye of the beholder. And one of the great things that Alicia Turner does in her book, Saving Buddhism, is to describe how basically through many periods of Burmese history, there's been these cycles where if it's not this, it's that. If it's not that, it's something else. That something external is seen as the reason why the entire sasana is in danger and therefore becomes justifiable to take some certain action in order to save the country and the Golden Land from the Buddha's teachings from disappearing. So this is really all very much in the eye of the beholder, and assessing how dangerous the threat really is, or if it's just kind of a cyclical thing that every generation a new situation comes along which is seen as a existential danger.
Right, and that's the thing about this. It's not just the specific event. It's a thing that happens over and over again. And again, the twist there is like, I appreciate what it can do for people's faith to kind of get involved and think they're protecting the sasana. But the irony there again is like often I think it convinces lots and lots of people that they're protecting the sasana and that the sasana is important. And in that sense, it's good. But then at the same time, the way they think the Dhamma or the sasana is being damaged or lost versus upheld and maintained and sustained, what's really going on is the things that really matter are deteriorating, and perhaps even more so sometimes by these, because these things tend to eclipse. They're out front and they tend to eclipse, or people tend to forget about the essence and focus more on these things, and then the essence of Dhamma is lost, and then the Dhamma is lost. I mean, that's how I see it, at least.
Yeah, sometimes the cure can be worse than the illness.
Well, in this case, it's like the cause of the illness isn't seen, and the cure actually doesn't hit the mark. Matter of fact, it obfuscates the ability to see the real deterioration of the sasana. Yeah, absolutely. I know we're a little long on this one, but I hope it's justifiable. This was just such an interesting history of this region. Zaw just sparked so much of my own curiosity and fascination, and wanting to share, maybe nerd out a little bit, and hope that listeners are at least half as engaged as I am in sharing it. But I do want to wrap up and just share one personal thing that I found quite interesting. That was the story that Zaw told about the dead dog being placed on the table where Bodhita Taung Sayadaw was eating. And that was kind of I asked Zaw what the purpose of that was. And that was kind of like a practice in not being attached to food and seeing impermanence right in front of you, all these things together. And so what was interesting for me, though, is that when I was doing the conversation with Zaw, I was reading a book called Mindful America. Sorry, I don't have the author's name in front of me, but it was basically about
how the meditation movement had come to the US and kind of been watered down and integrated into local culture and used in ways that was more accommodating with what people wanted. And there was a whole section on eating in the book, and the author illustrated how the Dhamma messaging, the mindfulness messaging on eating, rather than talking about how one shouldn't enjoy the food or should not relish it, it's just part of sustenance. And you think of this really grotesque and intense example of the Bodhi Sayadaw, they would talk about how when you're mindful, you better enjoy your food. You enjoy it even more because you're aware how to avoid overeating, because there's an abundance of food for meditators who are usually middle class or better, and how to not have so much craving that you just eat and eat and eat and then you're unhealthy, how to purchase organic and sustainable products. And he points out that a lot of the Dhamma instructions on eating are actually geared more with females in mind, more for female audiences. And they assume a problem of abundance rather than insufficiency. And so I'm reading this chapter in Mindful America on how eating and mindfulness with eating has been reimagined and repurposed for an American populace. And then I'm hearing Zaw's story about a dead dog whose body is rotting, put on a lunch table of Bodhidharma Sayadaw to contemplate the role of food and the role of impermanence and inevitable death and everything else. And so this was just such a fascinating moment of the juxtaposition between how the West and the East, how Burma and the US are taking in a similar subject of mindful eating and just going in very different directions with it. And, it's very hard to imagine a new age self-help styled mindfulness book in America today recommending that you place a dead dog on your lunch table as a mean of observing your sustenance.
Yeah, maybe you should write that book. That'd be funny.
Yeah, not for me. I don't think in this climate.
Well, yeah, I don't think necessarily that all the Western advice on eating is so off the mark. That idea of enjoyment, though, I think that goes too far. And I just don't think. I wonder how that is even taught, because when I'm aware while I'm eating, I just realize what a chore it is. And so I realize that how I perceive things as enjoyable is usually because there's a burst of good flavor, which is pleasant. And then the mind wanders off and doesn't really pay attention anymore until the next big burst that kind of intrudes on the thought. And then the overall impression is like, wow, this is great. But like when I just aware the whole time I'm eating, it's a chore. And then naturally I don't want to overeat. It's not like I don't enjoy it or think it's disgusting, but I just realize like, hey, this is a lot of work actually to have to do like every day. Some people 3 times a day or more. I only eat once a day lately, but anyways, yeah, maybe we could use a few more dead dogs on our Dhamma table while we're eating.
Boy, yeah, I'd like to see that teaching.
Well, we can open a center. I'm not sure how popular it would be, though.
Yeah, okay. I think I'll leave that to you. In any case, it's been a great talk.
So this has been Zaw Win Part 1. There is a Part 2 coming, so people look out for that. We'll see you then.
I'd like to take a moment to describe what our aim was in creating this podcast series. Our motivation is reflected by the in-depth discussions we have with a wide range of guests in 3 categories of related information. First, we hope to educate and motivate listeners in their own practice through the inspiring individual lives of meditators sharing their experiences and perspectives within the Burma Dhamma. Second, we want to help meditators in gaining a deeper understanding of the history of Myanmar, such as its context, culture, and religion, so that they can better appreciate how and where their own practice fits into the Golden Land's rich Dhamma history. We do this through interviews around scholarly works related to Buddhist Burma. And finally, we hope we can help listeners gain a deeper appreciation of the richness of current Burmese Buddhist issues and how Buddha Dhamma has manifested in the Golden Land, which we get through a catch-all category, a potpourri of developments that can help shine a light on modern Myanmar, particularly its Buddhist context. Well, those are our goals, and we hope you found value in this particular show. If so, I want to bring up a gentle reminder that there is a minimum cost associated with every episode, and we are 100% listener supported. If you would like to hear more content like the show you just heard now, please take a moment to consider giving a donation to keep our engine running. If you would like to join in our mission to share the Dhamma from the Golden Land more widely, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Every cent goes immediately and directly to sustaining the programming. You can give right on our website via credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation or through PayPal by going to paypal.me/insightmyanmar. We also take donation through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. In all cases, simply search Insight Myanmar on each platform and you'll find our account. Alternatively, you can also visit our website for specific links to any of these respective accounts, or feel free to email us at info@insightmyanmar.org. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, spelled INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. Thank you for your kind consideration. You have been listening to the Insight Myanmar podcast. We would appreciate it very much if you would be willing to rate, review, and/or share this podcast. Every little bit of feedback helps. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the Insight Myanmar podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please check out our website for a list of our complete episodes, including additional text, videos, and other information at www.insightmyanmar.org. That's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you cannot find our feed on your podcast player, please let us know and we will ensure that it can be offered there. There was certainly a lot to talk about in this episode, and we'd like to encourage listeners to keep the discussion going. Make a post, request specific questions, and join in our discussions on the Insight Myanmar podcast Facebook group. You are also most welcome to follow our Facebook and Instagram accounts by the same name of Insight Myanmar. And if you're not on Facebook, you can also message us directly at burmadhamma@gmail.com. That's BURMADHAMMA@gmail.com, and we're also active on Dhamma Wheel. If you'd like to start up a discussion group on another platform, let us know and we can share that forum here. Finally, we're open to suggestions about guests or topics for future episodes, so if you have someone or something in mind, please do be in touch. We would also like to take this time to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, especially our two sound engineers, Martin Combs and Tharng A. There's of course Zach Hessler, content collaborator and part-time co-host. Ken Pransky helps with editing. Dragos Bandita and Andre Francois produce original artwork, and a special Mongolian volunteer who is asked to remain anonymous does our social media templates. We'd also like to thank everyone who assisted us in arranging for the guests we have interviewed so far. And of course, we send a big thank you to the guests themselves for agreeing to come and share such powerful personal stories. Finally, we are immensely grateful for the donors who made this entire thing possible. We also remind our listeners that the opinions expressed by our guests are their own and not necessarily reflective of the host or other podcast contributors. Please also note, as we are mainly a volunteer team, we do not have the capacity to fact-check our guest interviews. By virtue of being invited on our show, there is a trust that they will be truthful and not misrepresent themselves or others. If you have any concerns about the statements made on this or other shows, please contact us. This recording is the exclusive right of Insight Myanmar podcast and may not be used without the expressed written permission of the podcast owner, which includes video, audio, written transcripts, and excerpts of any episodes. It is also not meant to be used for commercial purposes. On the other hand, we are very open to collaboration, so if you have a particular idea in mind for sharing any of our podcasts or podcast-related information, please feel free to contact us with your proposal. As you know, our podcasts are 100% listener-supported. We welcome your contribution in any amount, denomination, and transfer method. You may give via Patreon at patreon.com/insightmyanmar, via PayPal at paypal.me/insightmyanmar, or by credit card by going to insightmyanmar.org/donation. In all cases, that's Insight Myanmar, one word, INSIGHTMYANMAR. If you'd like to give especially to support our new run of coronavirus episodes, please go on the GoFundMe site and search Insight Myanmar to find our campaign. If you are in Myanmar and would like to give a cash donation, please feel free to get in touch with us. Thanks, and see you next show.